That's good. There's very bright lights here, so I can't see you, and that helps with my nervousness. All right, well, I want to say welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 35th International Seating Symposium. Most of all, welcome to the great city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yes, round of applause. This is a great city. Lots of things have happened over the years in Pittsburgh that we'll talk a little bit about. But if you can remember, the last time we were in Pittsburgh was 22 years ago, 1997. And we thought we were pretty transformative back then. There were lots of things happening at that time. Everybody thinks of Pittsburgh as this town where coal comes up one river, iron ore comes down the other river, we put it together, we make steel, we send it down the river to the Ohio River, to the Mississippi, and that was basically a lot of how America was built about 100 years ago. So just a quick reminder from our chancellor is that we view education as a global enterprise here, and that's why we welcome all of you from around the world, and glad that you could make it to our great city. The weather's been great. We hope that it stays that way. It might snow this afternoon, but we don't think it will. It's a beautiful spring day, and today is the first day of spring. So, in 1997, transformation meant turning churches into breweries. And if you remember in 1997, we had our ISS reception at this brand new facility here in Pittsburgh near the Strip District. Now what's happening is when we look at convergence of what used to be rivers coming together to build America, we now have a new convergence where we're bringing facilities like the University of Pittsburgh, which has now formed into another organization, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, or what we call UPMC, and our own health plan. So this has created a great opportunity where laboratory innovations go directly to the clinic, directly to the classroom, and help to inform all of those variables, and also work very closely in a system now where the institutions of education and healthcare provision and provision of the equipment are working together in a convergence. So we're very excited to have worked in this kind of environment for the last couple of decades to be able to talk about what are the best ways to treat people with the right interventions at the right time in the right place. And that's really how healthcare is moving forward, not just here in the United States, but I think worldwide. Now, these great ideas just didn't all happen here in Pittsburgh. They happen all over the country and around the world. And that's why we're happy to have all of you here in this one place where we can share in our ideas, what we've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, so that we can work together, learn from one another, and move this great field of assistive technology and wheeled mobility and seating forward. One of the ways that we've been able to do this, we live in a world now of large data. Data is being collected on just about everything that we do and where we go and what we do. And that sometimes is viewed as a threat or a concern, but it's also an opportunity to start to look at knowing what works. We've done some work in our field now, and our data is getting larger with the registries, with the ways we automatically collect information from health records, instrumentation. But believe it or not, with this data, we're starting to show that, this may come as a surprise, that when you properly evaluate someone for a wheelchair and give them what they need, their function increases. Just in case you didn't know that. But when we work in a world where accountability and outcomes and research is what drives the system, we have to do those measurements. So things have moved forward. If we looked at where we were 22 years ago and where we are today, I think we're starting to turn that corner. So with that data, we can also look at things that, believe it or not, if you put someone in a properly fitted mobility device, their frequency of falls go down. If you put them in a proper seating system that's been properly provided, the incidence of pressure sores go down. Isn't that amazing to learn that? Okay, but we are working towards that end of how we're going to meet those goals and show that what we do has value. Another thing that's transforming is how we're going to provide this equipment. And I know this might be a little bit US-centric, but there are actually models in other countries that I've seen where this does work very well. We've been in a fee-for-service model for a long, long time, But all of healthcare is shifting away from that model. So it's not a matter of providing a service, billing an insurance, getting paid, and then if that service doesn't work, that's okay, you can repeat it, try it again, and bill for the service again. We're gonna shift away from that. All of healthcare, especially in a managed care environment, is looking at the person as a whole and making sure that we're not just looking at what do we get paid for, but how do we get paid to make sure that people are living in the community, doing the things that they want to do in the least restrictive environment in the most cost-effective manner. Now, yes, data is very important, but I also remind us, myself, behind each data set is a human being. Behind each ICD-9 or ICD-10 code is a human being. So we don't lose sight of that, but are there ways that we can systematically look at people, put tags on them, and see what happens over time? So for instance, reducing falls, reducing pressure sores, increasing employment rates, moving people from long-term care or restricted environments back to the community. How are they getting around? How are they able to get to their appointments? How are we learning things about who they are and what they do so that we can make sure that we have the right treatment in the right place for them? So that's a shift in models that I think is really going to help transform what we're doing, but there has to be accountability in that process to show our effectiveness. If we took a look at a very transforming technology right now, and that is looking at our wheelchairs, why can't our wheelchairs be instrumented? Our smartphones tell us where we are and what we're doing. It's giving information. We wear smart watches, Fitbits, that tell us what's happening, where we're going. We don't even have odometers on wheelchairs. And when you think about that, how then can we explain to a payer, a buyer, that just because a chair is 3 years old doesn't mean it's not ready to be replaced? If you look at our cars send us text messages when it's time to change the oil. We could do the same thing with wheelchairs. It's a little easier with power wheelchairs at the moment, but I think with all the bright minds out there, we can come up with methods to start looking at proactively looking at people and what they're doing so that we can predict when things are going to fail, and we could do preventative maintenance. I'm sure there was a time, not too long ago, that if you got the flu, you went to the hospital, you got treatment, and that's maybe what the hospital wanted because that's how they got paid. I get text messages from my health plan now that reminds me to get my flu shot because they don't want us in the hospital. They don't want us being treated. They don't want us spreading infections. They want us to be healthy living because everything is much more cost effective, and the reality of it is that's where we want to be in the first place. No one wants to be in the hospital. No one wants to be a patient. So we have these opportunities sitting there. And I think something like the smart wheelchair apps are all going to be the future of how we provide these service. And what's nice about it is it will be able to better explain to the buyers and other stakeholders why this stuff is important. I think I find myself and all of you that every time you're submitting a claim and you get a denial, you have to re-educate your reviewer, and we're doing that over and over and over again. That's like teaching one student at a time versus a classroom of 100 students. So if we can come up with ways to systematically show what we do so that when a reviewer looks at it and doesn't really understand who we are or what we do, they can at least see that there's a protocol being followed. Other opportunities that we're seeing here is we've done testing. All of the devices we use are tested typically in a laboratory to ISO or ANSI RESNA standards. And it's really interesting now that suppliers and providers are starting to use electronic health records, claims systems, that we can now start to compare. So what's happening in a test lab, and this is a very interesting jig that was just developed here at our institution, and there'll be presentations about it. It's like we, for instance, test casters. And we have ways of doing that in a laboratory setting, but how does that translate to what really happens out in the field? So when you look at some of the software that suppliers are using, is we're looking at this now, we're saying, okay, this is what we're starting to see in the real world. So what we're doing in the laboratory to test is actually showing up to be validated by what's happening out in the field. And again, these are opportunities for us to prospectively look at people, but then retrospectively analyze the data to know what's going to happen. As you know, casters are probably the most vulnerable component of the chair that requires repairs. So we've got some challenges ahead of us. The number of people using wheelchairs is increasing about 1,000% in the last 50, 60 years. Back, I believe it was 1959, 1 out of 1,000 people used a wheelchair. Now it's 1 out of 100 people. If we look at us as a profession, and I'm talking about the assistive technology professional, if we put ourselves in perspective of other professions, we are still very young. It doesn't mean that we've fallen behind, it's just that we're new. We've only had the ATP certification since 1996. If you look at occupational and physical therapy, that goes back to about 1919, right after World War I. And it was probably only until the 1970s, 1980s that there was licensure. And now we're at the point where by 2020, physical therapy and occupational therapy is all going to be at a doctorate level here in the United States. If you look at orthotics and prosthetics, which is probably a little closer to what we do, that really only became a profession in the 1950s, and just in the last 10 or 15 years has gone to a master's. Assistive Technology, 1996, we had the ATP, and just this past year, we've had the Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation and Assistive Technology, which allows programs to become accredited by the Rehab Engineering Society of North America to provide educational programs. The issue we had, a study that was done just recently by one of our students, Joy Nick, she'll be presenting this later this week, was to look at how old are people in this profession. Well, the average age, can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, that's me. I was wondering why I was holding this box. So if we look at the average age, that's how apropos, right? 52 years old is the average age. The average age of the American worker, and I'm sure this is not just here in the US, is 42. If we look at a growth of 4.8% per year, if we look at a retirement rate and we look at a replacement rate, we're still running a deficit. So when you talk to young people about career opportunities, this is perfect. There's going to be lots of jobs. And not only that, this is really fun stuff to do. So there's lots of jobs, it's fun to do, and you get paid well. I mean, that's like a parent's dream when their kids are talking about where they want to go to college and what they want to study. So that's one opportunity to look at. At this point, I do need to pause and just talk a little bit about other industries. And I think this is another part of our future. And I'm not just saying that our industry is different than others. We're all about the same. We get stuck in our silos and we look at how we build things. And we build things, if we work in automotive, we build it for automotive. If we work in bicycle industry, we build for bicycles. If we work in wheelchairs, we build things just for wheelchairs. But there are lots of things going on around right now where we could start to share a lot of technologies, a lot of innovations. This is going to make things faster, it's going to make things more cost effective, and we'll be able to serve people better. So if someone gets a flat tire on their wheelchair, they should be able to get it fixed relatively quickly by going to a bicycle store or somewhere else and have some parts that are standardized across the different industries. When you look at things like the Internet of Things, smart things, smartphones, these are all things that we're going to start incorporating into what we do. So the next thing is standardization. And that's what I was talking about a few minutes ago. We all have our ways of evaluating people. There are position papers out there on wheelchair service provision through RESNA, ISWP has some stuff. But if we can come up with a standard of how we do this, what variables we measure, and how we report those measurements and have consistency around the world, that's going to make everybody's job a lot easier. The adversarial relationships between the provider, the payer, the manufacturer, the supplier should be gone. We should all be working together using a standardized procedure so that we can decide, or show, I should say, what devices are going to work best for what people. If you look at what Medicare policy is right now, it is completely atrocious. It does not reflect any disability rights legislation. It doesn't reflect best practice. But because we're not able to come up with a standardized way, they can only use coding and ICD-10s to develop policies. So I challenge you all to keep working towards this. So the numbers. Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. These types of conferences just don't happen automatically. A good proportion of funding to run this operation is through our sponsorships. So at the At the diamond level, I'd like to thank Key Mobility, Invacare, and Quantum. And then we also have people at the platinum, bronze level. So thank you. Round of applause for our sponsors. So everybody wants to know how many people are here. As of, I believe, yesterday, we were just over 2,200, which is pretty much a record. So thank you for all coming. We had Community Day yesterday, which is where we invited people in from the local community to attend the exhibit hall. That was sponsored by UPMC Health Plan, so thank you very much. I think we had about 400 people there. We have 37 countries, which is actually a record. Here's our usuals, but I wanted to point out that we've got 13 new countries, a very large contingency from South America. Shout out to Lebanon for being here, and I think especially Venezuela. So it kind of tells us that regardless of what's going on around the world, all the atrocities, natural disasters, that we are strong and people are still attending conferences and collaborating regardless of leadership around the world. So good, I'm glad everybody is here. We've also grown significantly since 1997. Back then we had like 400, 500, 600 people attending. We had the conference here in the US, Maureen and her group in Vancouver, but we've expanded since then to Europe, Latin America, so Argentina, Colombia, and we also have Oceanic, or the Oceania folks have come on board, so I think that's great. All right, I know that I get to get up here and talk, but honestly, most of the heavy lifting is done by this great team that I've been fortunate to work with. So I want to acknowledge the continuing education team at the University of Pittsburgh. I think if you've noticed, I think they did a fantastic job. I mean, just the fact that check-in yesterday was probably the smoothest process I've ever seen at any conference. So just some housekeeping logistics, and then we'll move on. I also would like to acknowledge the core of volunteers that we have, which are primarily students, people from other countries. But I'd like to thank Don Hameline and Joe Stratman and Mitch Bell for coordinating this. There's about 100 or so volunteers. They're wearing the yellow Ask Me buttons. I think they're all at the back. You want to just throw your hand up there. They're good to have here. Going back to the average age of the practitioner, it tells me that we need to bring more students to this conference and let them know what a great profession this is, because they will be everything about our future. I also want to thank the sponsors of the conference. Part of the money that they donated is to provide scholarships. Again, to that note of bringing young people in, they were able to give 13 scholarships to students from various universities. So I believe that group is right here. So put your hand up, acknowledge them. These are all people that will be looking for employment opportunities very soon. So, as far as other logistics, if you haven't downloaded the app, it's a good way, a good source of information. There'll be push notifications. You can go to the Android store, the iOS, and be able to do that. Whoops. There we go. Some other logistics, we have a party tomorrow night. That's at Heinz Field. If you don't know what Heinz Field is, that's a very large stadium where it's the home of we like to say the home of the Pittsburgh Panthers football team, but it's also the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We have a very nice venue there. If you have purchased tickets in advance, it will be part of your name badge. You can just tear the ticket off. If you'd like to buy a ticket, they're still on sale at the registration desk. If you decide to just show up, that'll be $50 cash. All right? So everybody has to have a ticket to enter into the party. The forum is going to be tomorrow. That's being coordinated by Carmen DeGiovane, Susan Taylor, and Jeannie Minkle. This should be a very interesting discussion talking about strategies in the provision of seating and mobility in the future. So that'll be tomorrow morning in this room. We have a keynote closing address by our good friend Michael Boninger, who's going to talk about the good and the bad of the industry that he's received over the years. So at this point, I'd like to invite the chair of our department, Jonathan Perlman, up onto the stage to say a few opening remarks.
So I think this is where I repeat, this is where we see how coordinated my talk and Mark's talk is, because a lot of what I want to say is to really echo and reinforce what Mark said. First, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to Pittsburgh. We're thrilled to have the conference back and want to thank you all for the excellent turnout of what Mark showed, over 2,000 people from over 30 countries. Mark asked me to keep these kind of brief, so I just want to give a couple of important points. First, I want to echo what Mark said and congratulate him and his team for the excellent work here. This is a huge effort by his team, and we do this every 2 years because it takes that long to coordinate a really well-run conference. I also want to thank the volunteers. This couldn't be done without the volunteers that are here, and the volunteers not only here, but for the past many years of the conference have been critical to make it a success. So I want to stop here and give one more round of applause to everybody that supported it. The second point I want to make is related to the theme of the conference, which again is bridging the gap from data to value. Now the meaning of this is a little bit different to each one of us, but it's really a common thread that we all need to be focused on. It's because, as Mark showed, we can't improve clinical services unless we measure what the outcomes are. And we can't improve products unless we know what is breaking and what is working and how long it's working. Mark showed some of the plots that we're going to talk about in sessions throughout the week to really get down to understanding what products are working and what are not working. And the third part of this is we really, and maybe most importantly, unless we can measure the value that we're providing by doing appropriate wheelchair provision, we simply cannot make a great argument for the policies and the regulations that are required to make sure the quality of the services and products are available and paid for. And so this is incredibly critical for all of us. The third point I want to make is related to some information that we know about from data. So last year, the World Health Organization reported that the numbers of people who will need assistive technologies globally will double from 1 billion to 2 billion people by 2050. And that's an enormous number, right? And Mark touched on a little bit about this. We also know that the market is going to grow from $15 billion in 2015 to an estimated $26 billion by 2024. That's a 73% increase in just 9 years. This increase in demand for assistive technologies is just one part of the equation, and Mark provided some insight into that. The other part of the equation is that the number of professionals, if we look at that number, we don't see the growth that's needed to support the numbers and the growth of assistive technologies that are needed globally. In the US, for instance, there are more ATPs retiring than there are being certified per year. And we all really need to be committed on changing this trend. I'm proud of our Pitt team for helping in this. Our recently accredited master's program is one of the first of its kind where classes and clinical internships count directly against the work hours necessary to sit for the ATP exam. On the international front, our team recently launched a basic level wheelchair credential as part of our USAID-funded International Society for Wheelchair Professionals. We know that many others are dedicated to this effort globally. We have representatives from AT Scale here, which is a global effort led in part by USAID and the Clinton Health Access Initiative to ensure assistive technologies are available to those who need it. We also, for instance, have had an overwhelming response for an international meeting that we're holding tomorrow at 7 a.m. I was surprised that we had over 140 people request to participate. But again, I want to reinforce this message that it's critical for all of us to do more, to make sure that the careers that you have built are laying the foundation for the continuous growth of the sector. So you all need to become advocates for your own profession, work within your own professional societies that you participate in to build that pipeline of wheelchair service providers. Reach out to your colleagues, your kids' friends, and encourage them to follow that career path that we know has the impact. Again, I want to thank you all for coming, and I wish you a great conference and a great time in Pittsburgh. I now want to introduce and invite the Dean of the School of Health and Rehab Sciences, Dr. Tony DeLito, up to the stage.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Mark. I would like to welcome you to the 35th International Seating Symposium. My name is Tony DeLito. I'm the Dean of the School of Health and Rehab Sciences, and that's the school that houses all of the rehab professions, PT, OT, speech, language, pathology, audiology, counseling, all of them. So 22 years since this symposium's been here in Pittsburgh, and I want you to think back 22 years ago. I know 22 years ago I had a lot less gray hair, and I guess that means I'm maturing now in my older age with more gray hair. But really, I think 22 years ago, when I think back, again, like a lot of the rehab professions, the science of what drives our professions has grown tremendously. And we really have created, in many instances, an evidence-based practice, something that when I was in school was non-existent. And this is great. We have this evidence base that's behind, certainly in seating, everywhere that our professions reside, we have this increasing evidence. So what's missing in this path, this evidence-based path? Well, what's missing really is this area of implementation, and what's missing is the area of matching up what it is we do with reimbursement policies. And that's where you see this drive for value, and I think this is a great topic to be talking about. My area of interest is back pain, and I'll just give you a short synopsis of what's going on in the area of back pain. The first thing that people need to realize is the evidence for non-pharmacological treatments is out there, and it's very strong, to the point where in 2017 guidelines came out, and the guidelines were very clear about, in painful musculoskeletal conditions, non-pharmacological treatments first. And that you would think would be the panacea. We'd be finished. It'd be, we've done what we were supposed to do. But we all also know that the path to implementation, getting that done consistently across the board, getting the best practice standards out there is a chore. And secondly, getting us reimbursed for these sorts of things is a chore. And here's where I want to kind of leave you with light at the end of the tunnel. We've worked closely with payers, both our own integrated payer here at UPMC. You heard Mark mention the UPMC health plan. We pointed out that many times the codes don't match evidence. So you're left with this dilemma. Do you continue to use codes so that you can get paid well, right? Or get paid reasonably well? Or do you do things that aren't consistent with the codes but are consistent with best evidence? It was not a good decision that you had to make. And what the payer did for us, understanding this, was they created a bundled option for us where we didn't have to look at codes. And not only that, but the bundled option included one payment, one co-payment, which again addressed another barrier that we had. We took this to a nationally based payer and showed them with their own data that early intervention, early non-pharmacological intervention, when compared to non-pharmacological intervention, actually reduced the likelihood of being on opioids tremendously. And now that payer is writing policies that have eliminated much of the co-payment barrier that we've had out there. So I'm telling you this because it's possible. The light at the end of the tunnel is not the headlight of an oncoming train. It really is possible to work with payers. So I think it does my heart good to see payers here. It does my heart good to hear about the idea of value. Our responsibility is to continue to work closely with policymakers and payers and try to bridge this gap so that we can offer our services in a very cost-effective way. And I'll leave you with a quote that I heard from one time in the 1990s from Brent James, who was the CEO of Intermountain Health. And he kept, I had the opportunity to meet him one time, and he said something sort of profound to me. He said, the cheapest way to treat people is the best way. And it's played out all the time in many instances. So keep that in the back of your minds when you're frustrated. That the value-based care really ends up being matched up pretty well with evidence-based care. So again, I'd like to welcome you to Pittsburgh. In addition to interacting with your fellow professionals, I want to echo Mark's comments. Get out and see our city. We're very proud of it, and we really love Pittsburgh. So thanks and welcome again.
All right. Thanks, Tony and John. At this point, I'd like to invite Kendra Betts up to the stage, who will be introducing our keynote speakers.
Good morning. Congratulations on a fantastic kickoff to the International Seating Symposium. I'm Kendra Betts, a member of the advisory committee. Great to see a wonderful audience, and we're really looking forward to a wonderful couple of days exchanging all of our innovations and ideas for advancing this practice. It's my honor to introduce our first keynote speaker. Carol Schrader is mother to two young adult triplets, two of whom have cerebral palsy, and a 13-year-old daughter. In 2008, her then 11-year-old son created a blog, The Blessing Counter, and encouraged her to write. His willingness to have his story told so that even just one family could find hope in their journey of raising young children with cerebral palsy inspires her still. So Carol, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your story as a parent. Thank you.
Well, I love hearing that you were in Pittsburgh 22 years ago. 22 years ago? Okay. I don't see the clicker. Did one of you take the clicker? Maybe not. I'll look again. It's not here. Do you see? Ah. Thank you. Well, so 22 years ago, we were a little busy. This is what we were doing. So you were here in Pittsburgh, and we were in Chicago. We're three little baby had just been born. When the doctors told Wade and I that we were having triplets, I have to tell you that a lot of things went through my head. I really wondered if I would be able to ever sleep while feeding them and loving them and bathing them. I wondered if I could nurture them and do all that they required and still, sleep and bathe myself. I wondered if their names should rhyme or if I should dress them alike always. I never once wondered if they would roll through life, if they would walk, or if they would use crutches. Benjamin, Mason, and Claire were born 3 months early at 28 and 4/7 weeks, 4/7. Those were a big 4 days. After 2 months in the NICU, with all the ups and downs and the forwards and the backs and the crises and the successes, I finally had everyone at home, and I thought the hard part was over. But I was wrong. At 9 months, only one of my 3 could sit up. By 12 months, only one could crawl. And by 15 months, only one could walk, our daughter. By their first birthday, doctors had diagnosed both our boys with cerebral palsy. We started intensive therapies when they were 9 months old. I thought the goal was pretty straightforward. We were trying to get them to catch up. I thought we were trying to help them overcome their developmental milestones. I need you to understand that people kept telling me they were developmentally delayed, and I understood delay. We were invited to speak at ESS last year in Dublin, and Wade and I had planned this glorious week-long vacation there around the conference, and work obligations required us to shrink it all the way down to just a 36-hour period. It was okay. I had my guidebook. I had mapped out the things that we could see before we rushed to the conference. And then we got to Boston and our flight was delayed. And then it was delayed again. And with every delay, I began to pull my guidebook out and cross out things. Okay, I really didn't need to do that, but we're gonna do this and this and this. And then the next hour we would sit there, I would have to cross out something else. By the end of the day, we only had 24 hours in Dublin. Not long enough, Simon. But we got there. We were delayed, but we arrived in Dublin. I was spending months in therapies waiting for my boys to get there. I was waiting for them to catch up developmentally. In my memory, I asked very few questions. I offered very little feedback. I was completely out of my element, and I'm not gonna lie, I was scared to death that if I asked questions, what the answers would be. The preschool years were filled with microanalyzing every single movement, every single struggle. And by 3, we knew we were facing long-term disabilities. Mason had been using a little walker to walk since he was 18 months old. He was eager to move and groove. And my Benjamin just wanted to love and be loved. He was quite content to sit in my lap. But around 3, he started using a little walker as well. I wouldn't even allow the word wheelchair to be used in their presence. I called it the W word. If the therapists were going to talk about it, they had to say the W word, not ever to say wheelchair. For me, it represented all sorts of limitations. It represented all the things that they would never be able to do. And frankly, it screamed that this was not a disability we were going to outgrow. When the triplets turned 4, Mason had progressed from his little walker to the small cuff crutches that we call power sticks in our house. Benjamin was still using his little walker, and when I say using it, I mean I would put it down in the floor, I would sit him in it, and I would tell him to go. And 15 minutes later, an exhausted little boy would arrive at preschool too tired to shine, ready for a nap. It was about this time that he was at physical therapy, and his therapist was trying to teach him to get from the stroller into the walker. She had worked and she had coerced, and he had scooted his little bottom, and he had finally gotten in the walker, but he was backwards. And she said, "Okay, Benjamin, what are you going to do now?" He never missed a beat before he looked at her and goes, "I guess I'll do the hokey pokey and turn myself around." My son was smart, and he was funny, and he was kind. And I was forcing him to enter every room, every event, every day, completely exhausted. I knew it was time to start talking about a wheelchair. When we went to try one out, my sweet boy, who is always so intuitive to my emotions, he's like a little barometer. He looked at me and goes, "I don't need this, Mommy, I walk." And I wanted to scoop him up and run from that room. But before I could, and you'll understand this, he saw a joystick. I don't know what it is with boys and joysticks, but he was super excited. And as soon as he realized that he could, I think we're going backwards, but there we go. As soon as he realized he could drive around a space and talk at the same time, I saw a smile bigger than I'd ever seen before. He went to timeout for the first time 2 days later, I gotta tell you. We were in the hospital, and I'm herding these cats, trying to get them to physical therapy, and I've got Mason walking, and Claire's running, and Benjamin's rolling, and I lose him. I lost him completely. Everyone's searching, the kids are searching, the therapists have come out to help me search, the office staff is helping. We find him. He's been going into patients' rooms. He thought they needed to see him. He was 5 years old. Benjamin required a big surgery when he was 6. When the surgeon asked him if he had any questions prior to the surgery, Benjamin replied, "Will I still be able to talk?" The surgeon was clearly perplexed. He said, "I'm not operating on your voice, I'm operating on your legs." To which Benjamin reminded him that the year before he had done the same surgery on his brother, and when he talked to his brother on the phone, his voice was very messed up. Benjamin really wanted to avoid that at all costs. When Benjamin woke up from surgery in the intensive care unit, he tried to speak to me, and he couldn't. His voice was very raspy, sort of like mine is today. I'm sorry. When he realized it was raspy, he started vomiting. The team rushed in, and they gave him more pain meds, and he went to sleep. He woke up the second time and tried to talk, and his voice was raspy. And so he started vomiting. They gave him more pain meds. He went to sleep. He woke up the third time and tried to talk, started vomiting. The team rushed in, and I said, "Wait, let him wake up enough to know he can talk. I think he'll be okay." We did. He stopped vomiting. He was just worried that he had lost his ability to communicate. I am telling you this because while therapists were working on teaching him to stretch, and they were teaching him to stand, and they were teaching him to get from his wheelchair to his walker, and while doctors were looking at his hip development, and they were worried about surgeries, and they were trying to save his hips and release his tendons and deal with his spasticity, Benjamin was setting his own goals. And Benjamin's goals were to talk, to speak, to argue, to debate, to perform, to act, to use his voice to make a difference in the world. He was 6. Last year, I read a statistic online about the percentage of children who will walk and roll through life with cerebral palsy. It was a beautiful graphic presented by one of my favorite organizations. It's very educational. The numbers: 60% of children will walk unassisted, 10% of children with cerebral palsy will walk assisted, and 30% will roll through life in a wheelchair. couldn't walk away from the computer. The comments that followed this graphic were breaking my heart. There were moms begging for someone to tell them their children would walk. And so I began to reply to every mom individually, telling her about my sons and how great they were and that walking should not be the end-all, be-all. See, these moms, they don't have children that are about to graduate from college. They don't know that their child's future can still be bright. They've pinned all their hopes on whether that little bitty will walk. I get it. I understand it deep down inside my body. I was there not so very long ago. I sat in the playroom floor and I pretended we were playing when really I was trying to teach my boys to balance, to sit independently, to support their weight when they stood. I pushed and I cajoled and I begged for them to walk. I thought it was the end-all be-all. I stood in toy store aisles looking for that perfect toy that would motivate them to reach or to grab. We did weekly therapies, sometimes daily therapies. We had surgeries and then we had more therapies. And all the while, I kept thinking that walking was so stinking super important that it was the goal to normal, that it was the goal to being our best. And so why would I take the time to comment to each of these moms? Why am I here to tell you my story today? Because I want you to hear me. Walking was never Benjamin's goal. It was never his goal. Benjamin knew who he was already. He knew what he wanted to do and what he wanted to accomplish. I know that standing and weight bearing, all of this is important for children like mine. I know it is. But when we make walking our biggest goal, the largest dream, then we force families like mine to dedicate all our time and energy towards it. And we shortchange an entire population of children. My boys are worth far more than the sum total of their motor skills. When we started therapies, I had my own paradigms. I had my own preconceived ideas. In my mind, a wheelchair meant limitations. A wheelchair meant giving up. For Benjamin at 5 years old, a wheelchair meant freedom. He knew immediately how amazing it was to navigate his own world and still be able to talk and not be so exhausted. His world opened up immediately the day I knocked down my own biases. By the first grade, we thought we had all the logistics down pat. We had a ramp, we had ramps, we had a van, we knew the sidewalks we could take to get into his schools. But in the middle of that first grade school year, Benjamin got in trouble. He apparently needed a restroom break at an inopportune time for his teacher. He would roll out with his aide and they would go to the restroom. He was eager to get back to class though. He loved school. And so while his aide was washing up and doing all the things that she needed to do, he didn't want to wait. And so he would roll back to his classroom. Unfortunately, his teacher preferred the door to be closed. And so that created this horrible thing for Benjamin where he couldn't get in the room. But he devised his own plan. He took the tray on that wheelchair and he just gently, or not so, rammed it into the door. His friends recognized what he was doing and would immediately jump up and come let him in. I thought he was brilliant. His teacher, not so much. One afternoon, she gave us a stern encouragement that we needed to come up with a new plan. And so when Benjamin went to bed that night, I heard him crying. And I'm going to tell you, I knew. He was crying because that teacher had stolen his joy, and he was worried. So I go to his bed, and I kneel beside him, and he goes, "Mom, I'm worried." And I'm like, "I know." In my head, I'm thinking, I am going to see her tomorrow. I said, baby, what are you worried about? And my 6-year-old looked at me and said, I'm worried when I'm elected president of the United States, they're not going to let you live in the White House with me. Oh boy. The most important thing you can tell your families: do the stretching, do the standing, use the gait trainer, but also find what lights your child's fire. When Benjamin rolls into a room, eyes turn. When he speaks, people listen. He was part of a teen government mock election when he was 15. 500 teenagers elected him as their president. I heard the roar of excitement when he won his primary. I snuck in the back of the room when they were having the presidential debate. It was amazing. His dreams were never limited by whether or not he could walk. Today, he's less than 2 months away from college graduation. He's majoring in theater with a minor in political science. I'm kind of hoping my dream of living in the White House isn't dead. I got to tell you that my Mason was different. He wanted to move and groove, always. He would watch his sister and he would try to do exactly what she did. When they were little, we had this play set in our backyard, and one day Claire, the triplet without cerebral palsy, climbed up the ladder to the playground, to the little fort at the top, and Mason tried to follow, but the spasticity in his legs wouldn't allow them to come far enough apart for him to use the rungs of the ladder. I watched as he struggled, and then I watched as he sat down in the grass for a few minutes and just stared at that play set. And then I watched as he crawled over to the slide and climbed up it to get into that fort. He was 4. Mason uses power sticks to walk. He uses a scooter to get around his college campus. He recognizes that cerebral palsy can give him some roadblocks now and then, but he also recognizes they open doors. When he lays aside his crutches to encourage someone younger or someone, one of his friends, people stop and they take notice. He's getting a double major in anthropology and classics at Millsaps University. That means he's majoring in anthropology, Greek, Latin, and getting a minor in archaeology. He's a really smart kid. He has spent summers in both the Yucatan of Mexico on a Mayan archaeological dig site, as well as off the coast of Spain in Menorca, digging in an ancient Roman burial ground. He was part of a service team to a home for HIV patients when he was a freshman in college. He called me very emotional after the day, and he said, Mom, we walked into the room, these college kids, and the patients were a little taken aback by us. And then they saw me. And one by one, they came and asked my story. He started to cry as he said, Mom, I realized for the first time that maybe my crutches aren't as much a roadblock as they're going to knock down walls to help and minister to people who otherwise would be afraid to come near me. So why have I told you all of this today? Why are you listening to my story and letting me brag on my amazing kids? Because listen, as the occupational therapist and the physical therapist and the seating specialist and the advocates, you are on the front lines. You are the hand that will walk so many families through the years, those early years of coming to terms with the diagnosis. You may not think the most important things you do are stretch and straighten and measure ranges of motion, but trust me when I tell you, you're doing far, far more. You are the point of contact. Mom is going to see your face far more than she sees a doctor's. She's going to come to trust you because she has to. You're the one balancing her baby on that big ball. Use this time to educate, explain the process, explain the reason, the purpose. Help Mom find a bright future for her children. Benjamin and Mason's first occupational therapist, Susan, gets credit for holding my hand in those early years. I remember she kept working by dangling these beads in front of the boys, wanting them to grab these necklaces, and I didn't understand. I kept begging, in my head, I kept begging for her to move on to the big stuff. When would they sit, and when would they stand, and when would they learn to walk? Finally, I asked, with tears running down my cheeks, why she wanted them to grab necklaces, why she wasn't teaching them to walk. And this precious woman looked at me with tears running down her own cheeks and said, they have to reach across midline before they can do anything else developmentally. And with a determined look on her face and mine, we continued pushing them. Your kindness will be huge. Listen, include the family. I think I'm going backwards again, sorry. Mason wouldn't be walking today if it weren't for his sister Claire. He watched everything she did. He followed every example she set. And even Kate, our littlest, needs to be included. They care so much about their siblings. They need to be included in the process. I asked Benjamin what he would say to you today. He thinks it's super important that you understand his wheelchair is not just a seat. It becomes part of his body. Last year, we visited our local wheelchair clinic in Mississippi, trying to alleviate some instability and some pressure sores that Benjamin was developing. They offered him a new wheelchair. We didn't complain. We thought they knew what they were talking about. We thought it was the right answer. Benjamin called it a torture device for 6 months. When we finally started pulling up pictures to show them that this was so different, radically different than what he'd been using, we realized, yeah, they had changed it from a mid-wheel drive to a front-wheel drive, completely changing his spatial significance. And he couldn't figure out how to drive it and get it in small spaces. It's not just a seat. The wheelchair is part of his body. Changes are huge. So while it has to give him the support he requires, we also can't just arbitrarily change things without taking into his spatial presence and understanding how he's handling it. And finally, and please hear me, remember that acceptance comes at different rates. Keep talking. Emotion convolutes our hearing. Mom is very well trying to process. She can hear you, but she may not understand what you're saying because she's tired and she's scared and she's nervous. Please keep talking. When Benjamin was running for president, he was asked if he could take a magic pill to cure his cerebral palsy, would he? On stage with hundreds of teenagers hanging on his every word, he said, no, I wouldn't change who I am. When we got home, I asked, hey, were you just trying to get elected? Because sometimes that happens, right? He said, no, Mom, I don't know who I would be without cerebral palsy. And I like who I am. I wouldn't change a thing. Almost 22 years in, I have to agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for sharing your story. We really appreciate it. It's fantastic. It is now my pleasure to introduce our second keynote speaker. John Lovelace holds several positions within the UPMC Insurance Services Division, through which he oversees the government health program lines of business with UPMC. This includes the managed Medicaid programs, managed long-term care services and supports, children's hospital insurance program, Medicare and Medicaid special needs programs, individually medically underwritten coverage, and the operations of federally facilitated marketplace operations. He has been associated with UPMC Insurance Services for more than 20 years. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much. Happy spring at 5:58 tonight. Something to look forward to. What a handsome family. Congratulations on a great job. I was going to sort of ad-lib this because I feel better when I'm sort of spontaneous, but I decided with 2,000 people I probably should do a little more preparation to this. So I'm going to watch while I read down as I'm moving along here. I've also set my timer on, so I'm able to stay on top of what I'm doing. And I'm starting that now, so we're ready to go. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Pittsburgh. As you've heard from my predecessors, it's a wonderful place to be. On behalf of UPMC and UPMC Health Plan, we're happy to be among the sponsors of this gathering of the International Seating Symposium. UPMC is a world-renowned healthcare provider, as you've heard from my predecessors, an insurer based here in Pittsburgh. As Pennsylvania's largest employer, we are pleased to provide more than $900 million a year in benefits to communities both regionally and across the state. As you heard Tony say earlier, as a provider-led health plan, UPMC has created a unique laboratory to align incentives, deliver better care, and reduce costs while improving the health of our 3.5 million members. We put members at the center of everything we do and share our learnings broadly to improve the health and healthcare of all Americans. We support a wide array of initiatives and organizations that help families and individuals achieve a healthy, well-rounded lifestyle. Numerous targeted interventions address social determinants of health and improve outcomes of the most vulnerable and underserved populations. Soon we will announce unprecedented funding for the purchase of medical equipment to improve accessibility for individuals with disabilities in medical offices. The new ADA-compliant equipment, which includes items such as accessible exam room tables, chairs, and wheelchair scales, is designed to help reduce the barriers of care for people with mobility challenges. UPMC Health Plan also works with many regional community partners, such as Variety, a Pittsburgh-based nonprofit that helps kids with mobility challenges. Over the past few years, we've donated hundreds of customized adaptive bikes so children can experience the fun and freedom of one of life's best thrills, riding a bicycle. There are many things for which Pittsburgh is famous outside of healthcare. I'm going to show you two of the most important. You've heard a bit earlier. I'm happy to say neither of these is on the upswing. In terms of nutrition, you may have already run across this, the famous Pittsburgh salad. This involves healthy greens topped with French fries. French fries are everywhere here. We could be French for all we know. This was reportedly invented in Pittsburgh as an effort, apparently, to boost the fortunes of the statin industry and cardiologists. If you haven't had one, actually, despite how they look, they're actually quite tasty, and I encourage you to give it a shot. This is kind of a little ironic. This is, 10 years ago, people would say, this is where you want to be when the world ends, because here it will be 10 years later. But that actually is no longer the case. This is an outdated image of Pittsburgh, which is known to be a bit conservative. And throughout this conference and your visits to various sites around Pittsburgh, you'll see how much this image has changed greatly. You saw earlier in, I think, Mark's slides, a picture of Bakery Square, home of Google and Uber and the Hurl Center and a bunch of other creative folks. And this is also a center of creativity in terms of startups. So you can just look at this for a time. It's not going to read this to you. It's just lots of interesting things happening here and lots of innovation and lots of support from CMU, from Pitt, from UPMC, from technologists and companies. In many ways, this is a bit concerning, because I'm looking on the screen, it's not what I'm looking at down there. So this is just being tested my skills of walking and talking at the same time. In many ways, of course, the movement toward civil rights, inclusion of personal rights, is a corollary of the civil rights movement in this country, a journey we have not yet completed. I'm just showing you a little picture here. This is the next thing we're going to build, the UPMC Vision and Rehab Hospital, which you would walk to from here, actually, when it's built. A brand new building with no patient beds. This is all an outpatient service to do vision research and house the Rehabilitation Institute. The inclusion is the goal of this conference, the goal of the conversation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of how we got here and where we're headed. So you probably know Katie Beckett. Katie Beckett died not too long ago at the age of 34, but she is a landmark, the case in a landmark decision in the Reagan administration. Katie was born with nutritional deficiencies that required that she live in a hospital for the first 3 years of her life. The Katie Beckett waiver, which is the first medication movement of Medicaid into more community-based supports, allowed her to go home with her family with supports where she lived for another as I said, she's about 3 times her life expectancy at 34. So Katie Beckett waiver is still sort of a shorthand term for what underpins the foundation of the funding of Medicaid long-term services and supports that I'm going to talk a little bit about at the end. Second milestone, of course, is in July of 1990, and the signing of the ADA. Not much more to say about this, a landmark decision. They created an equal opportunity law for people with disabilities. It's one of the most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation that prohibits discrimination and guarantees people with disabilities have the same opportunities to participate as everyone else. A third is a landmark decision called Olmstead versus the United States. Olmstead was the, I think, Secretary of Health or Human Services in Georgia. The plaintiffs were two women who were institutionalized, had been institutionalized for many years, and sued to get supports to live in communities. The Supreme Court ruled in this in the early 90s, and has created the foundation for what creates serving people in the least restrictive and most appropriate environments. These policy and legal decisions have created a pathway to the use of Medicaid, medical assistance in Pennsylvania, as a primary funder of long-term services and supports to enable frail elders and people with disability to live successfully in community settings of their choice. Not only is this progressive public policy, but it's also a prudent use of public funds. Separately and together, Medicaid and Medicare are the major funders of healthcare for seniors and people with disabilities. The advent of Medicare Dual Advantage Plan shows you just a bit of how Medicare pays the primary payer for service and supports in the long-term service support section. Medicare doesn't pay for these things generally, it does pay for equipment. Medicaid is what pays for supports. The advent of Medicare Special Needs Plans for newly eligible folks offer a voluntary enrollment to low-income frail seniors and people with disabilities to integrate long-term care with acute care and create opportunities for partnering around the triple aim of improving the participant experience, managing the cost trend, and enhancing the outcomes of care. I should tell you before I go on, that part of my background to this, turns out I went to the same school Mark did. I'm a rehab counselor by training. I did that very long ago. I was happy to hear from Mark that the average age of practitioner is 52, because that's one of the first times I've been above average in my week here. I'm trying to keep up that goal as I move along. I'll tell you a bit about long-term services and supports. It encompasses a broad range of paid and unpaid medical and personal care assistance services that people may need for weeks or months or years or the rest of their life. When they have trouble, particularly when people have trouble completing self-care tasks because of aging, chronic illness, or disability. Long-term services and supports aid with activities of daily living, such as eating, bathing, and dressing, and instrumental activities of daily living, such as preparing meals, managing medications, and housekeeping. Long-term services and supports include, but aren't limited to, nursing facility care, adult daycare programs, home health aid services, personal care services, transportation and supported employment, as well as assistance provided by family caregivers. Care planning and care coordination services help beneficiaries and families navigate the healthcare system and ensure that proper providers and services are in place to meet beneficiaries' needs and preferences. These services can be essential for LTSS beneficiaries who often have substantial acute care needs as well as long-term care. People needing long-term services and supports include elderly and non-elderly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, behavioral health diagnoses such as dementia, spinal cord or traumatic brain injuries, or disabling chronic conditions. a beneficiary's age, gender, socioeconomic status, living arrangement, and access to information about care options, in addition to his or her health and disability status, can influence the types and amounts of long-term services utilized during the duration of care. While Medicaid is the primary funder of long-term supports and services, it is families whose labor, if paid at market rates, that would be the largest source of funding. You've heard Carol's story about her long journey with her kids, and I'm sure it continues as they move along through life. It's true of many families. Family caregivers together create about $470 billion worth of value in terms of supporting people in communities, some on their own, some with the supports from the healthcare system. I'm not going to read these things to you. It's just a list of, in Pennsylvania, but I have 3 slides of this, so you don't have to take notes. I'll leave this behind me when I go, but the list of services that can be used. Part of the advantage of moving into a managed environment, as you heard Mark say earlier, when you're at CMS and you're in a fee-for-service world, the way in which you manage cost is by making rules. We only cover Power 3 wheelchairs. We don't cover 4s. We don't cover elevator seats. We do cover this. You can only have one of those every 3 years. There isn't any ability to do anything personal because it's a gigantic, of course, $1 billion budget. As you move into the point of managing long-term services supports is that the payer, and we're a payer, can work with the user and the provider to make individual decisions about why should you have a group 4 wheelchair, or why should you have a mid, and you know what you call that, a mid wheelchair motor versus a front-wheel drive motor or a rear-wheel drive one. The opportunity to make individual decisions in terms of meeting people's needs. Because we're lucky here to be part of the rehab program in Pitt, the decisions we make about assistive technology are really based in consultation with the Center for Assistive Technology, which maybe you'll get to see or hear more about while you're here, which is sort of the high end of evaluating of all the range of options of things people could be using, which makes the most sense for this person. That's different from what makes the most sense for the average person who has this condition, which is sort of the ICD-10 version of codes. On average, this is what people need, and on average, that's probably right. But as you know, I'm above average, and all of you are above average, and so average is not the right way to think about this. We want to think about this in terms of individual growth. So here's a bunch of services, including some health. These are not primarily health services, other than home health care. They're primarily support services. There are daytime services, rehab services, things that beyond what Medicare pays for. This is all Medicaid, not Medicare. Pest eradication, one of my personal favorites. I have not found that to work in my life as well as I would like it to. There's way too many pests around here, but it's not here, but generally speaking in life. And instead of services around supports, there are not only services for people, but supports including coaching for caregivers and supports, transition services for people who are in institutional care who want to leave. A big, as you might imagine, if you're in a nursing facility for a long period of time, you've mostly lost your apartment, you often don't have family. Even if you are physically well enough and want to move to community settings, it's a big burden to move from 24/7 care to independence. So in this program, we offer cash assistance and supports, assistance finding places to live, including temporary rental assistance while you qualify for other supports. So it's really a wonderful opportunity to make a big difference in the lives of many people who are enrolled in healthcare programs. In Pennsylvania, there are about 2.5 million Medicaid recipients. Of that 2.5 million people, about 400,000 or so are people who are dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. That's because they're low income, as well as being either frail seniors or people who are not seniors with disabilities. Some people are all 3 of those things. And there's some children who qualify for Medicaid. Pennsylvania has an eligibility criteria called a loophole. If you're a child with a disability, child being under 21, you can qualify for Medicaid regardless of your family income. Basically, it's just your income, and that's a great support for lots of people move here for this, because it's not something you can get in most places, and it creates a vast array of opportunities for kids in school and out of school for the time they're 0 to 21. So luckily, with most kids here, when you age into 21, you can the preparations to move into one of these waiver programs that we're talking about here in terms of LTSS. So it's a reasonably seamless transition. It's not seamless, but could be harder, and makes a nice point on how you move forward in lifelong planning. Just talk a little bit about assistive technology. It's a big piece of this. I'm sorry, here's my other slide here, where the money goes. The family givers provide lots and lots of care. They continue to do that without. You can see how much the average cost is for folks. This is an ARP slide. There's lots of ways to slice and dice this. This is just an example of how much money goes into this process and how much support can be made. The way this is funded is long-term service and supports are, on the whole, on the average, perhaps better to say, less expensive than the alternative institutional care. And the point of this is a better better quality of life, along with more flexibility and less cost to the system in terms of care. Long-term care services are expensive, but as you can see when you look at this slide where the average is, they are less expensive as you move more into community settings on the average. Not for everybody, but on the average. So it's a cost containment and quality of life improvement message as you move along. As you can see along with people who use services, a large portion of services people with disabilities are the community services that keep people out of institutions for longer periods of time. So getting to the point, you've seen lots of point pictures. This is one of our places, one of the iconic pictures of Pittsburgh. It always looks like this here. The sun is always shining in Pittsburgh. That's why we have actually no incidence of skin cancer here because the sun is always shining. The MLTSS round of services, MLTS is the shorthand for this managed long-term. It's called different things in different states. It's all Medicaid funding with Medicare. It just has different words. Sometimes it's long-term care, sometimes long-term support. The idea of this conversation is to sort of think of this as a circle of activities that go wrap around your life. That's where this is headed in terms of long-term care, in terms of opportunities to deliver services, identify needs, address caregivers, and think about how to deal with populations of people. One of the models to do this, you've heard a little bit about this morning, I think, in terms of models, is to look at the development of things that in the jargon are called accountable care organizations. Accountable care organizations are assemblages, if you will, of physicians and or hospitals and or providers of other sorts who have a holistic long-term view of the people they're trying to serve, the people who are their patients or their customers. The idea is to align financial incentives. That's the same idea for managed long-term services. So the decisions about where people are headed in terms of service supports are based more on the terms of, you heard Tony speak earlier, about value rather than cost. Investing $10,000 in something that lasts successfully for 5 years is a better investment than investing $3,000 4 times to replace things that don't really work the first time. So it's an opportunity to think more about, rather than the volume of service you provide, which is how providers have gotten paid for eons, the more you do, the more you're paid. This is more really about thinking about the value of services, so that as you decide what to do with families, with consumers, with providers and advocates, or what's the best thing to do, you're really empowered to take a long-term view of this conversation, not a short-term view. These are services that people need typically, not always, for long periods of time. This is not people who come and go from eligibility. They're enrolled in Medicare forever. You're enrolled in long-term services supports as long as you're financially eligible for this. So it behooves the payer as well as the provider to take a long-term view of how to invest in services and supports in terms of what people need, what do you need to go to work, what you need to be successful at home, what you need to be president of the United States if you're in the wheelchair, not the first person with a disability to be president. I won't go further down that road. You can make up of that what you wish. The idea of this is how to include assistive technology and durable medical equipment and enhanced whole person care in the operation of services. There's a wide range of services services that we might think of as assistive technologies. They are not, as you heard earlier, not necessarily covered by Medicare. Medicare is more about DME. Can you weigh it? Can you count it? There's certainly reasonable things to do here. Most insurances are relatively silent about technological supports, not covered or not. It's more an individual decision, and it's an opportunity to use for decisions that aren't made by Medicare and Medicaid around assistive technologies. Integrated Medicare and Medicaid benefits, which have merged in many state Medicaid programs, as it has here. This started here in 2018. We're in our second rollouts, 2018 in the Southwest part of Pennsylvania, we're here. 2019 in the Southeast, and where most of the people are, around Philadelphia. And then in 2020, we'll be statewide in all the rest of Pennsylvania, which is largely very rural and not connected to the Wi-Fi kind of place. So this provides for us some great opportunities to better integrate acute and post-acute care, including management of chronic conditions with long-term services and supports, because the funding is, in the end, kind of aligned. Participant choice and preferences should drive decision-making, and that is how we operate our business. Each person who's enrolled in this program, MLTSS, has an individual face-to-face assessment at mostly where they live. It's really their choice of where to have this done. You don't come to a hospital to do this. The assessment covers not only your medical needs, but your non-medical needs, and it really focuses on what is your hope for your life? What do you want to be president of the United States? And if so, what do we need to do to get you there? That's maybe a lofty goal, and certainly not guaranteed. You can't buy it. Well, you can buy it, I suppose, but it's been done, I think, but we're not the people to buy it for you. That's for you to raise your own money, I think, but you certainly can get supports to get there. So if it's important to you to go out with your friends on Friday nights so you can campaign, then getting you to your friends on Friday nights is part of the goal of your service plan. Participant choice and preference drives decision-making, and it's coupled with a shared decision strategy that includes the provider and the participants' alliance. Oh, there we are. Isn't that interesting? Turns out my presentation is on the laptop, just was not where I was looking for it. So I'm going to start again. You're lucky. I'm on the first slide. We'll go run through this again. The development of value-based payments really, as I said, is focused on participant satisfaction, on long and short-term outcomes, which drive new and more effective approaches. It's not about what's the fanciest thing to do necessarily. It's really about what's the best thing to do. If you invest wisely, just as you do with your money, if you invest wisely in assistive technology and equipments and supports, you'll get better results than if you don't. And measuring outcome helps you determine where to go with this. Serving timely access to high quality care for people with LTSS needs is a priority. There are thousands of people who are probably eligible for these services who don't know how to get them. One of our missions in life, and one of yours, I hope, as people in the caregiving business, is to help people identify how to go about that process, how to find more resources that support you. Because in many states, the eligibility process is kind of daunting. Medicare is relatively easy. Medicare, Medicaid is pretty hard. Lots of rules, lots of papers. People stop, I think, one of the interesting statistics I've heard from our state. Oh, there's my 5-minute warning. Lucky for you, 5-minute warning. 80% of the people who apply for waiver service in Pennsylvania in the past, not now, don't finish the application process. That is partly because people start and realize they're not eligible, they're not low income enough, or they have some other supports, but it's partly because it is so daunting, you have to be desperate to go through crawling under the bed, finding your utility bills and your driver's license and your birth certificate and your Medicare card and your this and your that. It's not really intended to be daunting, just as a very daunting process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rehab goals. The primary goal of rehab, and as you know, and this is to help individuals with disabilities to achieve the fullest physical, psychological, spiritual, educational, vocational, and economic independence and interdependence with their communities, as can be achieved within the scope of what their skills and abilities and interests are. I'm going to tell just a little bit about the Center for Assistive Technology. I hope you get a tour. It's a fabulous place up in Oakland, which is about 2 miles away. It's a quick bus ride. Wonderful group of people who are very adaptive around taking time, individual assessment, looking at the latest technology, making evaluations. So it's not, again, the shiniest object. It's what's the best object. Sometimes the best is old-fashioned. Sometimes the best is the newest possible thing. That's very heavily reliant on our process. For us, the important issues are to be sure that the goals of the participant are known and valued, that the goals are part and parcel of the results of health and risk assessment. These are incorporated into goals for the service plan, and these goals and the service plan get incorporated into the healthcare plan. So the medical, rehab, support, individual and community services, and family resources are key elements of where we're headed. As I try to wrap this up, this is one of these little catchy slides. It always seems impossible until it's done. That's kind of how this journey feels. Implementing managed long-term services supports is a huge lift. We're in the healthcare business, we're not in the support business, so learning new relationships, new identity, new possibilities, new ways to integrate and new ways to interact with folks is a great thing. And a great opportunity to move this a step forward. It's really a wonderful opportunity. And coming from a rehab counseling background, I haven't done rehab counseling for years and years and years. I mostly did psychiatric rehab back when I did this. So it was wonderful to see this happening. What we do have to think ahead, as my favorite philosopher, Yogi Berra, would say. If you don't know, be careful if you don't know where you're going. You might not get there, and you might not know it when you do. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. If you have any information or questions, you want to feel free to give me a buzz or email me. I'll be here a little bit after this. And thank you. Welcome to Pittsburgh. Thank you for joining us, and have a great time.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, John and Carol. At this point, I'd like to invite the poster presenters to line up. This is something that we've done at several ISS now, where each of the individuals giving their poster presentation have 30 seconds to give you their pitch. After this, we'll then have about a 10-minute break while we flip the rooms around and get ready for our sessions.
Bear with me a little bit because we had a few people submit slides who I believe are not going to be presenting their pitch. Am I going backwards? How does this work?
Green for up, red for down. This one's a little behind, so you want to line it up.
Oh, gosh.
Right after Yogi Berra.
There we go.
Yep.
All right, come on.
"20 years ago, I created a simplified anatomical model to teach people how to accommodate tight hamstrings. I named it Hammy, but it was too labor-intensive to produce. Now, this 20-year-old invention, a seating clinic in Peru, a Montana-based nonprofit, a Virginia-based rehab engineer knowledgeable in 3D printing, a retired New Hampshire occupational therapist bring you new and improved Hammy. Come and see our poster explaining how Hammy came to be and how he can help you."
Hi everyone. Please come to my poster to see how we used digital technologies like 3D printing, 3D scanning, CNC machining, and other CNC manufacturing processes to make custom contoured seating at our center. And you'll learn about the materials that we used and some of the lessons we learned along the way. Excuse me. And yeah, hope to see you there. Thanks.
We can do our poster together, it's fine. Hi everyone, my name is Heather Feldner. I'm from the University of Washington in sunny Seattle, and had the privilege of working with 2 kids and families as co-researchers during a participatory research project where we gave them research cameras and had them take visual representations and narrations of their experiences with early powered mobility provision. And some really powerful themes of emerging agency and participation and provision challenges came about in ways that were accessible and gave kids a voice in research and design activities. So hope to see you and find out more. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Ahmed Shawan from Ha'emek Medical Center in Israel. Wheelchair users are exposed to vibration, which is a risk factor for back pain, disc degeneration, and muscle fatigue. A new technology was provided by SoftWheel, which puts soft shock absorbers inside the wheelchair itself. We did a study that compares the user assessment of SoftWheel versus standard wheels. There is a statistical significance was found in favor of SoftWheel. Come to see our poster. It's very informative, and we will be happy to share our results. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Tadahiko Kamegaya, an occupational therapist from Japan. We are developing assessment scales to assess the arm functions of people who are sitting in wheelchairs. I'll introduce to you several assessment scales. And when you use the new assessment scale that we have developed, it would only require plastic bottles and dry soap batteries. It's very reasonable and reliable. Please visit our poster and let us hear your ideas to improve our assessment scales. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Meredith Budai, and I'm a PT and ATP SMS from Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. I'll be presenting a poster on behalf of my colleague who wasn't able to come here. My colleague, who's a wound care specialist, completed a retrospective review between the years of 2013 and 2017 to determine the prevalence of pressure injury in our patients in our spinal cord injury center that had upper motor neuron injuries versus those with lower motor neuron injuries. Come check us out to see what she learned and how that might influence seating system and cushion selection. Thanks.
Good morning. We have butts. We have big butts, we have small butts, we're gonna have flat butts, round butts. So come see myself, Mary Shea, and Kelly Watt, our poster. We'll teach you about how different butts respond to sitting, how they deform, and how different butts respond to sitting on different wheelchair cushions, and how a compliant buttocks model deforms on these different cushions and how that compares, so how the buttocks model compares to different butts. So come check out our butts on poster number 12, I think.
Hi everyone, we are doctoral students in occupational therapy from Belmont University. We completed a brief scoping review on vehicle transportation for children with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Approximately 1 in 59 children in the US have been identified as having ASD, and transportation for these children is difficult because of maladaptive behaviors such as elopement. There's limited literature regarding parent use or misuse with standard car seats and booster seats for this population. We would be honored for you to visit our poster to find out more.
Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Erika Teixeira from Brazil, OT, and this is Ana, a physiotherapist from Brazil too.
Yeah, we're here to present a poster when we did a case study on the validity of the FMA. It's a tool that was developed here in US, and we are trying to validate that in Brazil and trying to improve our assessment and our service delivery in Brazil. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Sinagra. I'm co-founder of Pathview. We're a spin out of the University of Pittsburgh and Human Engineering Research Labs. And we focus on collecting sidewalk and pedestrian pathway data to improve accessibility and walkability for all pedestrians of any ability. So we use that data in a couple ways. One is to help the cities prioritize improvements. But the primary goal is that we're developing a mobile app to help pedestrians understand the safe and accessible routes to travel. And that's based off of the user's comfort settings, so a user who wants to avoid steep hills or a user that needs curb ramps, the route will tailor that towards them. And I'm happy to announce that today the app launched on the iPhone App Store, and then later this week it'll be available on the Android store. So give it a try, let us know what you think, and come see our booth at 124, the poster, and we're doing a survey at our booth to test out our web app so you can win a $100 gift card. So thank you.
All right, great. Well, I have nothing else to say. This concludes our opening session, so please enjoy the conference, and we will see you back in the rooms in about 10 minutes.